Hello and welcome to another episode of Million Dollar Media. I'm your sometimes host, Emily. Now, this review we talked about a little bit way back in our announcement video for what we were going to be doing for the year. However, it has been delayed on account of me being sick and various other factors. But I am here to talk about The Brutalist, the 3.5 hour long film that is currently nominated for Best Picture, starring Adrien Brody, Felicity Jones, and Guy Pearce. So to give you kind of a sense of what this movie is about before we hop into it, I want to quickly synopsize because I'm aware this movie has not been the easiest to find, nor has it been the most publicized, so the plot summary may escape some people, but the movie basically revolves around Laszlo Toth, played by Adrien Brody, who is an architect who comes to America in the aftermath of the Holocaust in order to get a fresh start outside of Europe, basically. So while the film is 3.5 hours long, it is this sort of historical epic that documents a lot about that period in history. It documents a lot about the Jewish experience at the time and the immigrants' experience at the time and how those things intersect. And it's a really fascinating and well-done narrative that I feel like hits a lot of very raw and difficult emotional beats that are associated with that point in history. One thing to note about this film before I sort of dive into what's good and bad about it is that there are certain aspects of the content of this film that are not going to be suitable for all viewers. It covers a lot of really difficult topics, not limited to, but including drug use and sexual assault. So if those are topics that are, potentially a source of discomfort for you, I'd recommend staying away from this film. However, I do think that it handles them very well and in a very honest and sort of raw way that I wasn't necessarily expecting. But for a 3.5 hour long movie, it does manage to keep up the pace pretty well for the majority of it. I didn't feel bored at any point. It does have an intermission, so that's a pretty good time to get up and refill your soda. According to the director, it's the perfect amount of time to go smoke a cigarette outside of the movie theater, whatever it happens to be that you need to do. That intermission in The Brutalist is just about perfect for it. And it helps segment the film's two halves. I will say, I think the second half of this film is considerably stronger than the first, and that is an element to consider. If you are feeling a little bit frustrated with the first half, I do think the film picks up a lot and has a lot of its best plot elements in the back half. It does feel like there's a fair amount of exposition at the beginning, but for the most part, this is a very straightforward narrative throughout most of the movie. It's very clear what it's about and the story that it's trying to tell. It's essentially trying to document this particular person's life, and I think it does do that very well and captures a lot of very interesting and difficult intricacies. I also want to give a shout out to the performances, which I think are essentially the make or break aspect of the film. And for me, they really worked. Adrien Brody brings a lot of rawness and emotional vulnerability to his role as Laszlo Toth that I think is really excellent and well done, and a lesser actor could not have necessarily captured in all of the same ways. And it's difficult to get into without spoilers, so the way that I will choose to phrase this is that there are a lot of things throughout the movie that we are very intentionally not shown. There's a lot of information that is withheld from us, and there are a lot of thought processes and emotions and experiences that we are intentionally not shown because that's kind of what the movie wants to get at, especially in its last act when the curtain is kind of pulled back and we're privy to a little bit more of that information. And I think it's fascinating to watch Brody's performance from that perspective because there's a lot of little details and little moments where you can see those unspoken things shining through in a way that is extremely well done and extremely moving and emotionally effective, and that quality is not limited only to his performance. Felicity Jones plays Erzsébet, his wife, who doesn't appear on screen until the second half of the film, but she brings an excellent performance with the screen time that she has, which is still like an hour and a half. So, it's not like a Hannibal Lecter situation where she's only on screen for 20 minutes. She's in a considerable chunk of the movie, and she is excellent in it. Guy Pearce takes up a similar situation. He is in the first half of the movie, but he plays this supporting character who's a billionaire that contracts Laszlo to build a building for him, and he essentially serves as somewhat of an antagonist for the film. He is the character that causes most of the direct conflict, and it is a fascinating and apt for the movie's name, brutal performance. that really stands out, and I'm hoping may earn him a very strong contention in the supporting actor category this year, which I'll talk about here in a moment. But beyond that, The Brutalist is also an extremely technically well-made film. Because of the focus on architecture, there is a lot of intentionality and craft that goes into the framing of a lot of the shots, and a lot of the way that the architecture is shot is really beautiful and striking. There's a particular scene earlier-ish in the film wherein Laszlo and his cousin are building a library, and the shots of the finished library are stunning. They still stick in my mind well after I've seen the movie. So if you're looking for some eye candy, The Brutalist is certainly going to be there to provide it. And I think it's very impressive. Brady Corbet is not a director that I was particularly familiar with based on his previous work, but he really knocked it out of the park from a direction perspective with this film, and it's very impressive to watch. So beyond that, I do want to talk a little bit about the direction that this film ultimately goes. So I'm going to put up a mild spoiler warning. While I won't be going into detail necessarily about the ending, I just want to sort of give my thoughts a little bit about the way that the narrative plays out and some of the qualities of the last portion of the film. So please keep in mind, if you want to go into this totally blind, maybe don't listen to this part of the review, skip ahead a little bit. But essentially, the direction that the ending of this film goes, like I said earlier, to sort of pull back the curtain on some things that we are intentionally not shown or told about throughout the movie, and to sort of recontextualize a lot of what goes down in the film and make you question certain perceptions that you had about events and characters throughout the film. And normally this kind of ending can sort of grate me a little bit, because sometimes I feel very frustrated when a movie is like, surprise, it was about a totally different thing that we weren't drawing your attention to. But interestingly, for The Brutalist, I feel like that kind of ending really works, because it doesn't require going back and watching the film again to understand the context that's being given to you by the ending. Again, it's difficult to say without going into spoilers, which I don't intend to do, but even a cursory look back at the film with the perspective that's given to you at the end will pretty clearly illuminate why we weren't told that and change your perspective on a lot of stuff that goes down throughout the film. And I, for one, was all for it. I thought it was a really beautifully done ending. I thought it was very emotionally effective, though the last shot still perplexes me a little bit. I'm not sure what to make of it. I think the general meaning of the ending is pretty exceptional, and is something that's going to stick with me for a hot minute. Every time that I sort of think about the film, the ending is the quality that I'm particularly drawn to. And with that, I do want to address a little bit of controversy that surrounded this film. I know I've kind of been singing its praises, but this film did kind of land itself in some hot water during this Oscar season for its usage of AI. I want to clarify, according to the director, AI was only used in certain Hungarian language scenes to help edit some dialogue, to have slightly more accurate pronunciations. Hungarian is notably a very difficult language to speak, and even more difficult to speak like you are a native speaker, which several characters like Erzsébet and Laszlo are supposed to be throughout the film. So AI was used to tweak some of that dialogue. I do not have a strong opinion on this. Obviously, there are discussions to be had around the usage of AI in film, but I can think of significantly more offensive uses of it than this particular one. That being said, I don't necessarily know if I would go so far as to endorse the usage of AI for matters like this. At any rate, there's also been some allegations that portions of the film's final sequence utilized AI for the design of buildings, which the director has denied, so I cannot necessarily comment on that, but it was not a thought that crossed my mind when looking at the designs in question. They did not look particularly AI generated to me, but it is still very possible, obviously, that they were AI generated or that they were based on AI generations or whatever it happens to be. I can't form a definitive opinion on that because there's not definitive information on that, but I did want to address it and not ignore that potentially controversial aspect of the film for those who might be off-put by it. But overall, I really liked The Brutalist. Obviously, for a 3.5-hour film about immigrants and architecture, it's certainly a difficult watch at times. I wouldn't call this light or like popcorn flick viewing, but if you're interested in these kinds of films, I think The Brutalist is going to satisfy you a lot and leave you thinking about it for a pretty long time afterwards. Now to talk about where I see this movie's path to success and failure at the Oscars. It's earned itself quite a few nominations, and it's been doing pretty well at other awards shows, including the Golden Globes. The categories where I predict the strongest performance for The Brutalist are going to be Best Lead and Best Supporting Actor. Adrien Brody puts on a stunning performance in this film, and I honestly think that he has a strong chance at that Best Lead Actor slot compared to some others. I certainly foresee Brody winning personally. Beyond that, supporting actor for Guy Pearce, while I still think that Culkin is the powerhouse that is almost impossible to topple, I think Pearce has a real shot at it, and if anyone that isn't Culkin is going to win, I do think it would be Guy Pearce. So that's my 2 cents on that issue, but I still think that Culkin more or less has that award on lock, for better or for worse. Beyond that, Best Cinematography seems like a place where we could see The Brutalist excel. It's a difficult category this year. There are a lot of good nominees, including Nosferatu, which I was happy to see get a nomination, and I just wanted to shout it out briefly, but I do think The Brutalist has a really strong chance in that category, purely on the basis that it is such a stunning movie and the framing of the architecture is so central to the film's point that an award for cinematography would certainly make sense in terms of the laurels that it might get at this particular awards show. Beyond that, Best Director is a tough race this year. It's all first-time nominees, which is pretty cool, and I certainly think that this movie would place above Emilia Perez and above A Complete Unknown. Competing with Anora and The Substance, I think it's going to have a tough time. It's certainly not impossible that it will find its way to a win, but if The Substance or Anora beats it, I certainly wouldn't be surprised. Both of those films are exceptionally well directed, and I think that that's going to be the sort of three-way duel for Best Director at this year's Oscars. Beyond that, another thing that I want to shout out that I think is excellent in the movie and maybe a place that this movie excels at the Oscars is the score. The soundtrack of this movie is phenomenal. It has a lot of really memorable, unique music that stuck in my head for a while after watching the movie. Like the main theme of it stuck in my head for like a week or two afterwards. It's really exceptionally memorable and unique, and I was super impressed by it. So I definitely think that Best Original Score is a place where this movie could excel, though it also has some steep competition in that category, including movies like The Wild Robot that also had exceptional music. So certainly not just a given that it will win, but I do think that it is a very strong contender, and I would not be surprised to see it doing well in that category. Finally, screenplay. Best Original Screenplay is not a super competitive category this year, and I certainly think that we could see this movie succeed on the basis of its ending, which is such a ballsy swing that not a lot of other movies would have made, and some of the intricacies of the plot and some of the implications that are used in the writing, I think, are clever enough that I would not be surprised to see this movie take a win for screenplay. But if it goes to something like The Substance or Anora or A Real Pain, I will be supremely unsurprised, specifically if it goes to Anora, which to my mind is the biggest competitor at the Oscars this year and is going to be a tough movie to topple in a lot of categories. At any rate, I hope you enjoyed this review. I highly recommend The Brutalist, especially if you were into these kinds of movies. Some people might describe it as Oscar bait, but I honestly think it's a great movie that's worth your time if you have the attention span to sit down and watch a 3.5-hour movie and not get bored or frustrated with it. If you can see it in the theater, I think that that's the best way to do it. I have trouble personally watching long movies at home, and the theatrical experience with the level of cinematography that this film is on is certainly appealing enough that I think it is worth taking the trip to a theater. So keep that in mind if you are interested in seeing The Brutalist, and make sure to add this one to your watch list because it's a really great film, and I think it would suck if its length was the reason that it went underappreciated. So thank you for listening. We appreciate you guys tuning into our videos. Keep an eye on the channel. We have a lot of exciting stuff coming out, including our upcoming 100th episode. It's definitely going to be one to watch. Share this video with anyone who you feel like would appreciate a 3.5-hour movie about architecture and the immigrant experience. And be sure to subscribe to our channel for a lot more awesome content like this. Anyways, thank you guys for listening. Bye-bye.